Joseph, if you and Lou will come up to the front just a minute, we'd like to make a little presentation to you. And this is Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Z. Ornelas. And they endowed the book for us, and just as a little token of our appreciation to them, we'd like to present them with a leather-bound, author autographed copy for their own library, and to wish them well, and to tell them we love them and we thank them, and we're going to let them go ahead and go over and support Baylor. All right, you won't need that anymore, will you?
Now you can go ahead and go back to your refreshments. In the Jarrel edition, or have family there. This is going to be a great program. Before we begin, let me have the invocation. If you will bow your heads. Father, we come boldly to your throne of grace. I praise you because you are eternal and never changing in your truth, your attributes, and in your attitude toward your loved ones. Thank you for giving us priceless promises so that we may have the assurance to appreciate our God-given freedoms, that we can assemble and appreciate the history of Smith County, Texas. Bless this society, its members and guests. Guide and direct us so that we may conduct the business and activities of this society in a manner that is pleasing to you. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen. We'll have the reading of the minutes of the previous meeting by Carol Godwin.
The March meeting of the Smith County Historical Society was held in Payne Auditorium at 7 p.m. on March 2nd, 1999. President Zelda Boucher called the meeting to order and gave the invocation. Minutes of the February 2nd, 1999 meeting were read by Secretary Carol Godwin and approved as read. Treasurer Bob Edwards presented the January 31, 1999 Treasurer's Report. Ms. Boucher thanked the Leith family for the refreshments and thanked Alice and Lloyd Gilbert for donating 40 new chairs to the society. New recording equipment, public address system, sound system, projection screen, and overhead projector have been purchased by the society. Guests were recognized and welcomed, as were new members. Randy Gilbert gave an update on the work in progress at Camp Ford, noting that work was being done today on the new parking lot area at that site. There will be a book signing party on March 6, 1999 at Payne Auditorium for the Born in Dixie book from 1 to 5 p.m. Orders for the book will be taken tonight and payments may be made tonight for the books. Tyler Heritage on Tour will include the Carnegie History Center on its tour March 27th and 28th, 1999, and the Society will have a display in the Azalea Trail Art in Bloom exhibit. Training will be held for docents to conduct tours of the Carnegie History Center. Additional changes to the bylaws of the Society were adopted as published following their presentation by Andy Lee. Ms. Boucher announced the East Texas Genealogical Society will meet on March 13, 1999 at 2 p.m. in Taylor Auditorium for a meeting about Texas land records. First Vice President and Program Chairman Mary Jane McNamara introduced Robert and Donna Shoup of the Tyler Lions Club. They presented a program about the 67-year history of the Lions Club in Tyler and evolution of its service projects to the community. Following the program, Henry Alsmeyer presented a brief Today in History reminder about Sam Houston being born in 1793, Texas being organized in 1836, and Payne Auditorium being dedicated in 1986, all on March 2nd. There being no further business, the meeting was adjourned.
Any additions, corrections?
Madam President, I'd like to make a clarification.
Okay.
As president of the Tyler Museum of Art, I would like the minutes to reflect and good that Art and Bloom is a project of the Tyler Museum of Art. Its annual fundraiser. It is done in conjunction with the Daily Trail, so the minutes are not in error, they're just a little incomplete.
Okay. Yes, we can supplement the records. Bob Edwards is our treasurer, and he is ill and unable to stand up, actually. He's having some back problems. So I'm going to read his report for him. As of January the 31st, 1999, the balance was $21,665.58. The revenue was $2,647.87, with expenditures of $2,664.44, with an ending balance on the end of February of $21,649.01. Any additions or corrections? They will stand approved as read. The executive committee would like to report or ask, maybe that's a better question. When you leave tonight, be sure and notice that we have yard lights outside now. You can actually see to walk all the way from the street around to the back door. And this is all of the compliments of the city of Tyler. They replaced a yard light that was on the building with a new one, and they had TU Electric fix the one that hadn't worked in several years, and so now we have great lights, so y'all will be able to see the big new car. And I would like to recognize the guests. How many guests do we have tonight? Hi. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you will come again next time. We are happy to have you. The book sales. I'd like to call on James Boucher as a member of the sales committee to give us a report on book sales.
The books that we have sold through Aiken Press, we sold about 440 books. Aiken's had recovered $23,072 out of the $37,000 he has to recover before all proceeds of the book go to us. For those that have reserved copies of the books are on order and should be here within a week. So we're going to come along very well.
Thank you. So if you haven't already ordered your book, you need to do so now. And now I'd like to turn over the program to Max Freeman for a special presentation.
We're going to continue the presentation we had to do a minute ago because the art analysis had to leave. And to continue, the society has published this history of Smith County, Texas, born in Texas. You know that the report that we have there, that the project is completed. We're still selling the books. And we had a lot of help funding the project from the art analysis who were here earlier and had to leave. Is anyone here from the paper? They were supposed to have a representative. What we have is the paper, as you know, very generously gave us a series of articles, front page articles, for 15 straight days when we were initiating this project, which excited the public and which got the interest in the books stirred up, which of course contributed greatly to the success of the project. And we have for them also a leather embossed set of the history of Smith County, Texas. And we will present it to them here now, sent you, and I'll see that it gets to them in appreciation for all that they've done for us to make this project successful. Now, he's a reporter. Nelson thought he would try to make it, but he apparently couldn't make it. Nelson told me he'd do his best to make it. Nelson the third and fourth over there. But he told me he'd do his best to make it. president, but we'll see that they get the book and appreciation expressed to them in your name. And now, of course, not the last, not the least, but a project of this size takes work. It takes publicity, it takes money, but it takes work. It takes people working, editing, gathering material, compiling it, putting it together, indexing, correcting, and amending. And we had a board of editors, and I see 3 of them here. And we have for them a little special gift that we'd like to give to Alice Gilbert. Dixie Beth is here, and I saw Andy Lee. James Wilkins, are you here? He's not here. Can you come up here to the front? I want to show the society's appreciation to these folks for long, hard hours of work of giving them their own special set of leather embossed autograph copies of their own personal library. Thank you guys.
That night special. I'm so proud of this editing committee. You have no concept of how many late hours they did and long hours. Well, you know, from the size of the book, you can imagine how much work went into it. And it is a wonderful book. They have done a marvelous job. Thank you, thank you. The East Texas Genealogical Society will meet Saturday, April the 10th, from 2 to 4 p.m. Dr. Dallas Cochran will present the trials and the triumphs of the Republic of Texas. So anybody interested in the Republic of Texas and genealogical work, that's a good program for you. Texas Historical Commission will present State of the State of Preservation, Thursday, April the 15th, from 5:15 to 7:15 at the Tyler Chamber of Commerce, the Blackstone Building at 315 North Broadway. And they're going to talk about how we can work together and what we can do and have a little blurb here. Bring attention to preservation tools that the public may not know about. Identify the elements of a new vision for preservation in Texas and determine the training needs to empower local communities and the THC to fulfill it. Ask what help local communities need most to save their historic and archaeological resources. Learn what various communities see as their biggest challenge in preservation and how the Texas Historical Commission can help us. So anybody that is interested, they really would like to have a nice turnout. It's a large meeting room, and so there'll be room for everyone. So if you can be there, we would certainly appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to turn the program over now to Mary Jane McNamara to present our speaker. Mary Jane is the Vice President of Programs for the Historical Society.
Mr. Willis Jarrel was not born in Tyler, unfortunately, but he's lived here since early childhood. Went to school in Tyler, got his law degree from the University of Texas, and has practiced law in this community for a very long time. He's been a judge in the late 60s. He's done all kinds of interesting things, but I heard a little rumor from a certain person about the marvelous tales he has to tell about his father, Dr. E.F. Jarrel, developing the Jarrel edition, and Willis helped him. Now, I had the wrong boundaries for the Jarrel edition, which James Wilkins told me immediately. He said, that house you had on the cover of the bulletin was not in Jarrel edition. Okay, so I thought Jarrel Edition was in another area as well as where it is. But Willis is going to tell us exactly where it is, how it came to be, and I know that you're going to want to hear it. Mr. Willis Jarrel.
Pleasure to be here tonight. I got this city map to try to illustrate what was here when we arrived in 1920. Now the courthouse is right there. That's the middle of Broadway in front of where the present building is now. That was the courthouse. The square around it was brick streets. And the pavement came down the bottom of the hill on Broadway. And then it came down one block on this street, one block on Spring Street, one block on. That's all the pavement that was in town. Down here at the corner of Broadway, Alexander's Garage, Presbyterian Church, is on this side of the street, and right at the little center. They had a wash rack over a creek that ran through there, so they washed the car and turned it down the creek. So the sand was so deep down there. In the summertime, cars would get stuck in the sand. So, and of course, out of Hall Street, sand, you couldn't go through there in summer. Cars would get stuck in the sand. And in the wintertime, you could go through there because the sand would be wet. And the red clay hill, you'd get up a good speed, you could make the hill guy get stuck on the red clay. But in the summer, we used none road to come to town because you didn't have much sand ready for that. Just had red clay on the way. Wagon yard was over there where jail is now. And old jail is just a little ways. About the same property. So that was Tyler. Now, around the square, you had Hicks Drug Store on the northeast corner of the square. Lou's had shop and trying to end up in Dallas and Lou something over there. She was on the corner for a while, but not her. They were using the wall that's upstairs. And I remember he had a hole there and white. It had a fireplace on the second floor of the middle. I've never seen it anywhere else. So that was long hair, Maggie's Cafe was there. Sister's Bank was on the corner where Regent is now. Across the corner was People's Bank. And right there on the corner, one story hill. A few years later, Tyler Bank Custom originated. I think its first location is where Rick's is now, right along in that area. And then later on, it moved over into the Swan Building, or where it was for years. That side of the square. Well, a band came in 28 and East Texas in 29. So Tyler got a lot of people. We were about 17,000 at the start. We had 30,000 people down here before we knew what to do with them. So you walk around that square, folks were so thick, I mean, you just have to elbow your way through, and you all had a back hand and looking and talking. That sort of thing. Well, citizens of Tyler Bank finally moved over to the old Swan Building on the north side of the square. Like I say, it was in the 30s. So up to his father ran a bookie down there. In the basement back there. At 8 tracks a day throughout the United States. H.F. was there, cracker there today. I was glad about him because my father was there on when I need to go to the show, that's where I go to get the show. H.L. was at 200 Win-Place show on almost every day. His brother was at 20 Win-Place show, or H.L. was at 100 Win-Place show. He was at 10 Win-Place show. I know there's a little difference in their pocket. So that operated there for 50 years. law enforcement got any sense. They moved out to tourist stores where London shop is now. They remodeled the tourist homes and shop over there for several years for them. They got sanctimonious and cut them out. Then you go on up the street to the top side, and here is the drugstore. That corner of one of the back just had a confectionery, ice cream, that sort of stuff. So we had Brian sit there on the corner where the federal building is now. And then where the fire department federal building is. Then you had Brown's bookstore. Brown's bookstore was nice, but I was going to the Baptist church then. You could go down there on Sunday and say, get them all together for 15 cents. And so that made going to church well worth while. So, and actually that was taxpayer life company. And then red building, stone post office, where the federal building, the first federal building, is located down on the corner. And then the First Baptist Church had changed much that we had to it. The main old building right there then, most strong. Of course, Martin Methodist, the same place. Then you come around on that side of the square, the west side, you had the Palace Theater. Then you had the Big Four, at the Colorado Music Lane Avenue. They had a general commercial deal, ladies, ready-to-wear, men's clothes, and everything up front. In the back, they had a farmer store. Served out the back alley, buy saddles, work clothes, all that sort of stuff. They take a deed from a fellow farmer, weird furniture that year, and then they deed it back to me, collect the money, that sort of thing. That's what I've heard. And then, down on the corner, Roy Brown's father, where the people back first building. Roy Brown's father had a clothing store there. I'm not sure who the department was at that time. And you come on around the square, you had the other stuff building. It was there on the corner, the building was still there. And right next to it, place, lady named Scott Dallas owned it. When I first started practicing law, we were representing them. Bunch from New York wanted to rent that property. And they had ladies for anywhere. Called the Dixie Shops, home office, Fifth Avenue. Anyway, negotiated with this having mentioned over that drugstore time. He says, yeah, I said, their granddad said he used to run the saloon there at that location before they loaded liquor out. I didn't know that we ever had a saloon at that time. So, you come on down, then, say, Tyler Bank started off over in that location, and just a place for anywhere to stop and stuff like that. Then you get over to the next corner across Broadway, the southeast corner, was Clark's Drugstore. That was a great place. So the fast and everything, you know, a lot of people hung around there, good my father. And then right down the street a little way with Jim Needham, he was selling hamburgers. They were a nickel apiece for 6 for a quarter. Stood right there in the street, you stand on the sidewalk, get the hamburger, and you can go inside it. Then on down with it was kids to play. And then on the corner was the Hub Local store. They had tomato season salad. Then up there so long, ink and faded in the side, it was good all over it. But they had tomato season salad. And then around the corner on Spring Street, so Brother Harper here, his father had a barber shop. And sometime in the 20s, my father opened the office next door to that because he was a veterinarian, and wagon cars was right down on the corner where the tail is now. So the folks, if they had one sick enough that they won't spend money, they could at least get him down. If you couldn't get him down, he wasn't trying to save anything. So but the tail was right across the street. Two-story that and I heard some whipping going on up there one time. I said, what's that going on? I said, oh, they got a come in, they got to give us some money to buy cigarettes. Said, if they don't have any money, they should be religious. Not everything. That was Smith County. That's not the way you walk around the square. Now you go out to South Broadway. See, I lived out in the country. Rose Hill Cemetery was in Broadway. And then we turned and went east, Old Crew Highway, and we were right over there. That's where I was raised. And that's where we ultimately opened the addition. Say we, I didn't do this. But anyway, that's where it was located. You had Gary School over here, no, here. You had Bonner School over here, Douglas, Marsh up here. So, we had, of course, living in Tyler High School, we had one senior high school, it's right out here on Front Street. So then, in 1926, well, Ted Starling's father had been in Florida, and he saw kids in college now. And he got down and well, that's a good deal. So he came back and promoted creating Tyler Junior College. Public school buildings that Commonwealth uses or did use up there right now.
Excuse me.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Good, thank you. So he promoted the idea of Tyler Junior College, I think it was 1926, and it was started right up there on the same campus with the Tyler High School, and flourished there for years. Then, going out Broadway, you had houses all along where Holly Motor Company is, on both sides of the street. And then you get to Houston Street, you had where Tom Ramey lived. Next door was Mr. Herndon, who had addition out around the fairgrounds, that area. Yeah, Herndon owned a lot of property, not only in Tyler, but everywhere. And then George R. Phillips, he was a merchant, landowner, sharecropped lots of people. He lived in the next house. Across the street was the Conley home. I think that's probably the first brick veneer home in Tyler. Now, I've always had mixed emotions, and I'm not certain, but either that or the Woolard place where Charles Clark's office is now. You look at this brick on the two of them, it looks like they came from the same place, but I'm not certain. But I always thought the Conley home was first, but it's probably a toss-up between those two places. Everything else was frame house at that time. So then you go on down the street, the Marsh sisters, Lucy, Mitty, they all lived in the colonial home that's there at the top of the hill, and then Judge Fitzgerald across the street. Oswald Bourne lived across the street. And then after the oil boom came in, he got rich, he built a two-story house up on the hill a little further back up there. And then there was one house more on Broadway. Well, no, there was two. Judge Castle's home was where Hogg School is, and that was a high hill. I mean, he was 50 feet above Broadway. So then, when they bought that for the school, well, then that's where they got the dirt to level the playground for the football field. And that was another sand bed. Well, I mentioned that earlier. That's a great sand bed in front there. I happened to go to Hogg School the first year it was open. Then the only other house between there and where we lived was what do they call it, the castle out there now, where the engineers are right next to Bergfield Park. That house was there. And so it was just out in the country, I mean. And so then when the oil boom came along, well then Roy O'Brown and Robert Wright, Johnny Wright's older brother, started a drive-in golf course at Bergfield Shopping Center, where Bergfield is right now. Well, before they started that was Palmer's Airport. O.C. Palmer had an airplane, and he'd park it about where 5th Street is now under an oak tree. And sometimes he'd taxi it down to his house on Shaw Street. Well, he could go down Broadway and then College Street over to Shaw Street and then put it in his front yard. So he'd have it one of the two places. It didn't matter. And so, but that was the airport there from about 5th Street out to the Troop Road. It was all kind of rough and rugged, but didn't have any trees on it. So the OC was there, and then OC was the first airport manager we had at what's now Pounds Field. Of course, when Pounds Field started off, it had one runway parallel to that highway by the school, and the elevation, if you'll notice when you go out there, you see a fence along here like this, and then you see about 25 or 30 feet of dirt. Well, this was the basic runway when this started to be. Had one runway that was uphill. And so, and of course it was dirt. I mean, there wasn't any pavement anywhere out there then. And had one hangar over there. So that is our airport development. Well, then, about 1930, we had this population explosion, and my father had, when he bought out there, he told my mother, he said, well, if Tyler ever grows, he said, that'll be city property. What do you mean city property? 2 miles from anywhere. And so he based it upon this. He had been reared in Dallas. He said the city in Dallas never crossed a railroad track. You had railroad track coming down Vine Street. You had the railroad track going across the North Park, which is still there. You had one coming down the Troop Road from White House, which is still there. So he said, well, I never saw it cross a railroad track. So that's it. Well, so that was his basic pitch for buying the thing. Of course, she was in Cuervo. He just happened to be up here on business and bought it. So had a great family. This guy, he said the reason he moved down in Cuervo, I was 3 and my sister was 8. He said he killed 2 rattlesnakes in the yard, and he decided that wasn't too good a place for children to be playing. It's a good time to move. So that's how we happened to came up here and decided, well, move here. So that got started. Well, he got the idea, well, he wanted to cut some lots up. Well, got a surveyor and got out there and surveyed off this land, cut these lots, platted them up. And he went down and talked to the city about running some water out there. Well, at that time, the city had water to 1st Street on Donnybrook and Broadway. That's as far south as it went. And so he said, well, I want you to run water out there. Well, if you'll put this pipe in, 4-inch, 6-inch, I've forgotten what size, and give it to the city, well, then we'll run it out there. You pay for all of it. Well, in 1930, 31, didn't have that kind of money. So he got the thing. He's finally the city commissioner, chairman of the city commission, says, Doc says, there ain't going to be no houses on that old red clay hill. And so they wouldn't do it. So he had all been worked in years around oil fields. And so he decided, well, I'll just drill a water well. Found a fellow that had a rig in West Texas and wanted to come to East Texas because all the action was out in the East Texas field and he didn't have any money. So he transported him over here, paid all his expenses and drilled a water well. Got a good well, 750 feet. And so then first pump we bought to pump the water. Water came up within 220 feet of the surface. And first pump we bought was from Texas Power and Light Company, the greatest thing since sliced bread, supposedly. And all they did was have circuit rods that break about once a month and have a pulling job and all that sort of stuff. So got off that, and my father then decided, well, I believe I'll try a airlift. Pipe air down 1-inch pipe, have a 2-inch pipe down there, and the water flows out in heads. They said, oh, that won't work. Well, it did. for a long time, and that wasn't enough capacity. So then we bought an electric pump that would produce, sold it for 40 gallons a minute, but it only produced 32. But anyway, it was a good piece of equipment. I've seen it run for 3 and 4 months at a time without ever being turned off night and day. Well, we started off, got a few houses going there. Then as influx came in, then the city won't take us in. So then they ran some water out there and got some folks on the troop highway to connect to city water. And so then they won't take everybody in city limits. Well, at that time, you had to vote to go in city limits and pay the good city taxes, you know. So nobody wanted to go. So they said, well, we're going to cut the water off. So then I guess we bought the water line or we took it over. I don't remember which we did. Anyway, we ended up with, about 12 customers the city had out there at that time. So that put us south of the Troop Road. And then about that time, they opened an addition that goes from, where Donnybrook is now, over to New Donnybrook, over to where Miller's house was. I forget what that street is there. So they wanted water. So we ran water over there to them. Then folks over to the east wanted water and a little bit to the north. So before we got through, we had about 135, 40 customers we were serving in the area. And so all we had in the way of help, one neighbor family, white boys, they had about 6 of those little boys. They worked for us, did yard work, everything that we needed. And one December, I had a pipeline main freeze and break. They had about 4 or 5 houses down in that area. I went down to get them to come, let's fix this pipe. Sitting around that stove, no, they wouldn't come. So I had to go down there and dig up 60 feet of pipe and replace that thing. And I was working in water and it was freezing cold and it was a day's work. I got to be a pretty good plumber during those years there. Sort of a jackleg way, you know. But anyway, I got them hooked up again. And so that went on real good. Well then, I told you Tyler Junior College got started here. Well, you know, I practiced law with Tom Pollard for a few years. We were officers in the People's Mind. Tyler Junior College was still here, and there was big agitation to put junior college 2 or 3 different locations. So we got located where it is now. And we got on, Tom and I got on the elevator one day, and the realtor was on there. Started kidding. I said, well, old so-and-so sure got to you on that land you sold out there by where the college is going. Yeah, he's got to me. Sure it is. Well, Tom had bought 40 acres of land right there where Whataburger is, Brooks' Superstore, from Fleshel over to Vine Street, where Kmart was, and including over the railroad track. I've forgotten how far north. He had paid $1,300 for it. He said that he was officing in the Citizens Bank, and he'd get down about 6 every morning, and Gus Taylor would get down there then. Gus was president of the bank. Gus was deviling him to buy the land. Tom said, I ain't got any money. He said, I'll take your note. He says, tell you what, I'll pay you $50 a month. $1,300 for that 40 acres. And he said, well, he had the papers up in my office before 10 o'clock that morning. He was that anxious to get that thing off the books. My father says, well, that's just red clay over there. I mean, you couldn't drive a car through it in the winter. You'd just be stuck, the whole thing. My father said, well, Tom will never get his money out of that piece of land. So then I read that Tom sold where the Apache Shopping Center is, sold that for $100,000. I said, well, Gus Taylor turned over in his grave today. Anyway, that was so. They kidded Tom on the elevator, and he said, yeah, he really got to me. And we went up to the office. He says, I'll tell you about that deal. He said, one morning I decided I wanted that junior college located out. Tom had about 300 more acres on out beyond there. He said, I wanted that college located out there. He said, I called up a fellow on the junior college board and said, I want to show you something. He said, I picked him up at 7 o'clock in the morning. Went out, I showed him that. I said, I need some money. I want to sell you this land. He said, I was going to sell him some land. I didn't care what price he wanted because I knew I'd have one vote for that junior college. Said he bought 5 acres off of me, $1,000 an acre. That's what they were kidding me about. But he said, we got the college located out there, and Tom didn't have but that 40 acres there, and then that about 300 on out beyond there. So that was the way that worked. But anyway, about the time, 40s, well, I got out of the Army, 45, 46, we had a real dry summer. And I mean, it was bad. And it's the only time we ever got short on water. Well, the city was threatening to take us in, then they could do it without permission. And they didn't want to buy the waterworks. And I wanted to buy it. I knew what they'd do, just come out parallel you and say, go to. And they said, well, these folks need water now, and we can't lay main, but we'll get a hose and we'll supply them right now. I said, buy it. Oh, they said, no, we're not going to do it. So we'd never done any business with Citizens Bank except my father had built some houses, and the cooperative savings and loan was there building the loan. And so we carried a house account over there, but that was the extent of our business over there. And I went to see Mr. Bell. I said, Mr. Bell said they want to take us in, and they're not going to buy that waterworks. And they're trying to do this. He said, well, I don't think that's right. He says, y'all pioneered that into town. He picked up the telephone, called the city commissioner, spoke with him shortly, said, I don't know what it's worth, but I think y'all buy it. So 2 days later, well, the next day we had a meeting with the city attorney and the city manager and agreed on a price and a contract. The next day we had a city commission meeting and authorized them to execute the contract. So that is the way that worked out. And so I'll add, your power politics. One time I was talking to Mr. Gus Taylor before I went in the Army. I just gotten a law license. I hardly knew where the courthouse was, And he'd taken a liking to me. He said, would you like to be county attorney? And I hadn't even thought about being anything, He says, well, think about it. He said, if you want it, let me know. And that's the way it would have been. But then December 41 came along and took care of that. But, they ran the county, and that was it. And he wasn't kidding or bragging or anything. He just, if I'd have said, yeah, I'd like it, well, okay, that'd been it. And so that's kind of the way it went. So after that, we weren't in the water business. Jarrel Edition was part of the great city of Tyler, and you all can see now how little Tyler was and how big it is now. Thank you. Yes, yes.
What's the border?
You know where Pollard's old home was? It's right across the street from where Mr. Pollard's home was, the two-story home. Right across there, fronting there. Not exactly squared up, but basically that's it.
Harry Jenkins was farming, did he have a clothing store down there?
Who?
Harry Jenkins.
I don't remember. I don't.
When we were in school, we had a bring us something. We needed some old clothes, and she and I went up there in the attic of that old store.
I don't. It could be, but I don't remember all the stores. I just remember some of them. Yeah, well,
Is the city water well there on this street, was that your well?
no.
Where was your water well?
We were about 200 feet north of the Troop Road. They had iron in their water. They had hell with it. And the well was never satisfactory, and we had no iron problems. And there was a fault in there somewhere, and we were in a different reservoir.
What y'all going to Carrizo Springs like
I think it was Carrizo. It's 750 feet. Of course, they say everything around Tyler's Carrizo, but
Who is this bookie?
well, I won't tell you who he was, but the layoff man was Red. What's Red name from San Antonio? It always wanted to get horse racing legal in Texas. Anyway, he was the layoff bookie in Longview. And this fellow that ran the bookie, mind you, they'd have 8 races, and they'd have 7 or 8 horses in each race. He was a good enough mathematician that when he was making money before he got to gambling himself, he would call the layoff man, say, I want to lay off 200 on this horse, 300 on this horse, 500. So it didn't matter which one won, he was making money. Now that's a good mathematician. He didn't have a computer. I mean, he could do that and lay off what he wanted there, so it didn't matter what his losses, he was going to win money.
I have basically the same question this gentleman had. I just need clarification. If you're coming on the Old Troop Highway,
Yes,
Jarrel Street, Sneed, those streets in there was Jarrel.
yeah, that's right.
And they go as far as Fifth? or-
6.
Six. So Sneed and Jarrel and.
Wiley over on the other side, on the east.
Belmont one?
Yes.
Okay. I know where we are.
Okay.
More questions? No more questions?
You graduated from high school?
35. In 35. Oh, let me tell you all a little old tale about sort of Texas. When I got in the Army, I was down at Montgomery, Alabama in pre-flight training, and so I thought, well, June Farner, said she was an Army brat. I wrote her back at her sorority in Austin. It turned out she was teaching at a college in Montebello, which is about 75 miles from Montgomery. So we got together and had a date there. Went in dining room, and I was the only man in there, and there must have been 500 students in there, who walked in. Then she came over to Montgomery one weekend, and I said, I'm going to Clarksdale, Mississippi for pre-flight. So she said, well, said, I used to date a boy from there. Said his grandfather founded it. Says the family owns the newspaper there. The Clark family. Says go by and introduce yourself. They'll be nice to you. So when I got to, going into Clarksdale, the train stopped, and we had a bunch of Yankees on there, Boston boys. And so train stopped, big old field, about 150, 200 acres, cleared. I said, what's that out there, Jarrel? I looked. I don't see anything. I said, what's that growing? I said, oh, that's cotton. So got in, I went into town. Now, you talk about Southern hospitality. This was it. I went in and introduced myself to the newspaper, and Miss Clark was running it. Had about a 15, 16-year-old boy there. She says, guy says, who's in town from college this weekend? I don't know. She said, we'll find out. Came back, says, so-and-so's in town. She said, well, get him a date with her. He called back a minute, he says, you've got a date, 7 or 8 o'clock. She handed me her car keys, says you can bring it back tomorrow. Now that is Southern hospitality. So I got to know a bunch of the good citizens there, and we'd imbibe a little bit on Saturday nights. About 11 o'clock, you know, they said, you're from Texas. Yeah. Said, which side was Texas on in the war? I'd say, oh, the South. I said, man, this is the furthest north I've ever been. They'd do a double take on that.
Really? Did you get your pre-World War II flight training at Palmer Field?
I took a seat. No, I never flew out there. I took my first airplane ride. Tom Pollard said, if you'll mow my lawn, I will pay for your airplane flight on that Ford Tri-Motor, 100 pounds. Took me a week to get him satisfied on the yard mowing. I guess that's it. Y'all got something.